Welcome to the third episode of After Peter Pan. I'm your host, Pat Tenneriello. If you're new here, I recommend starting with our 90-second trailer to get a feel for the show. This episode marks the beginning of the Anti-Peter Pan series, where from time to time I'll interview guests who have fearlessly embraced responsibility and commitment early in life to uncover their mindsets and learn from their unique journeys. Today I'm having one of those conversations. It's a heartfelt one with my longtime friend Simon Barrette, someone I consider the anti-Peter Pan. Simon was a former NHL Scout, a certified personal trainer, and a devoted husband and father who has fully leaned into life's responsibilities from a young age. Simon's story explores themes of moving abroad for love, balancing family and career, and learning to trust in life's timing. It's an inspiring conversation about courage, purpose, and finding balance, particularly meaningful for anyone who relates with the Peter Pan syndrome. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
It's interesting. I was just reminiscing a bit while you were talking. We've known each other a long time, and one very interesting aspect of our friendship is that you have a very direct link to many of the important decisions I've made in my life, which included, moving to Finland and meeting my wife, but I can get into that a bit later. But yeah, so a bit about me. I mean, we're the same age. I'm 39 now, almost 40. I'm Canadian, but I live in Finland. I've been living in Finland for since 2006. Married with my wife, and we have 2 kids, an 11-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter. Studied journalism in school, but never really worked very much as a journalist. I kind of went more into the PR and communications side. And, my studies kind of concluded, and I was very lucky to find a job when I moved to Finland. So my studies kind of concluded, and I moved to Finland pretty much at the same time. And I was able to find a very good job at the time with Nokia, which was a Finnish company, still is, but it was, of course, the biggest manufacturer of mobile phones at the time. It was like the Apple back then. And so I was able to work there for a year. It was a temporary contract, and that kind of gave me a lot of momentum, I think, for my future positions and career, and jobs. Ended up working about, I would say, 16, 17 years in PR communications for different companies here in Finland. And then about 10 years ago, also in parallel to my communications work, started working in hockey, in professional hockey as a scout. I worked a bit over 8 years as a scout for the Columbus Blue Jackets, which was a dream of mine, dream job and dream experience. But also maybe going back to what I started with, our friendship goes back many years. And one of the reasons that I moved to Finland is because I met my wife, who is Finnish, and I actually met her while visiting you in France when you were doing your student exchange, and my wife was doing the exchange at the same place. And that kind of, I would say, changed my life forever, because once I met her, I kind of fell in love and decided that, she was the person I wanted to build my life with. And that eventually, not too long after that, about a year, I was living in Finland already.
I remember those days well, even though it's been quite a while. I think we're going back to 2005.
20 years.
And I was studying abroad, and you came to visit me. And maybe that's a good place to dive deeper. For me, that experience of studying abroad was my first taste of freedom and my first time living on my own. And I went a little bit crazy. I loved it. I met people from all over the world, and I lived in a dorm. It was an international dorm with, like I said, people from all over the world. We had a very, very hectic social life. We were going out partying too much. And you came in the thick of that. And despite that atmosphere, you met the woman of your life. And
yeah,
at that point, I mean, it's so interesting because that's like the complete opposite of where my head was at that point in my life. And I remember we were talking, and you were so decisive, and you were convinced that you had met the right person. Can we go back to those days and just walk me through what you were feeling? Like, how were you so convinced? Because for many years in my life, I would wonder, how do you know? How do I know I've met the right person? And I would ask people that. And it wasn't at all obvious, because I would always think, well, I'm dating one, but that one looks pretty good. Like the grass is always greener sort of syndrome. So for you back in those days, how were you so convinced that you had met the woman of your life?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think it's probably comes down to intuition, comes down to a feeling, comes down to um, just a knowing. I mean, if I look back when I was a kid and even a teenager, young adult, and for context, so I think, we were probably 21, around the age of 21 when you were in France and I met my wife for the first time. But when I was younger, I always got attached to people very quickly, people that I connected with on an emotional or energetic level. I never had that. Some people have the difficulty of getting close to people or opening up or being vulnerable. And I was always someone who gets attached very quickly if I see a person that I feel is the right person that I want in my life. So I think that plays a lot into it. I think also the fact that when I was in my teenage years, when I was a kid, I always knew I wanted to be a father. I always knew that I wanted to be married. And it was something that I always was kind of looking forward to. And also I think, maybe my parents, they had me when my dad was maybe 26 when he had me. My mom was about 24. So I had, my parents were relatively young. So I always felt like I wanted to be like a younger dad versus an older dad, because I felt like, once you raise your kids, you still want to have a bit of time where you're able to pursue your passions and hobbies and stuff like that. That's why I think I was able to attach myself to this person very quickly and say, hey, I know that she's probably going to be my wife someday.
So part of it was instinctual, part of it was what you were exposed to from your parents.
Condition, maybe.
You and I share that we married internationally, and marriage on its own is not an easy feat. There's a lot of complexity. It's obviously beautiful, but it can be challenging. And when you add the international component, where you're uprooting your life, or one of the two of you is uprooting their lives to go and join the other, which is what you did. You moved from Canada to Finland. It adds even more complexity. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that complexity, and that despite knowing that it wouldn't be easy, you chose to dive in nonetheless.
Well, it's interesting that you bring the international element. I mean, you were also obviously very present in another milestone in my life, which relates to this, which was the student exchange we did in high school, going to Italy. And for me, that was the first time that I traveled abroad by myself without parents. Of course, we were with teachers and friends. But that gave me, we were 3 weeks in Italy, a taste of what it's like to live in Europe, what it's like to live in a different culture, in a different setting. And it's just funny if I think about it now that, we went through that experience together. I think that gave me a taste of experiencing another culture and being open to it and wanting to have that openness in your life. There's people back home in our city where we're from who have probably never really left Canada or have never really kind of traveled that much. And I know for a fact that some of them, for those reasons, would never move away from Ottawa or where we're from, because they're just so very comfortable being at home in the environment that they know. So I think that the trip that we did together as a student exchange in high school was like a big milestone in my life, just to kind of open my eyes, open my mind to what's out there. And from then on, I always wanted to move to Europe. I always wanted to live in Europe or live in a different country, which, then when that opportunity arose by meeting my wife, I was very much willing to do it. I was very much willing to uproot my life in Canada to go and experience something else.
Our families can sometimes put pressure on us in our life decisions. Our parents invest so much into us. Some parents are happy to see their kids kind of go off into the world, while others want to keep them close to their chest. For you, was there any pressure or guilt when you made that decision to go so far away from home?
Yes and no, I have to say. My parents were separated divorced since I was 2 years old, and he was remarried with a wife and 2 kids. And for a period of about 5 years before me moving to Finland, my dad and his kind of second family were living in Africa. And that's actually why I went to visit you, because I was visiting my dad in Africa. And that's when I met my wife. My mom and her partner at the time were moving a lot. They had moved when I was younger to Montreal, and then now they were moving to Toronto. So there was a feeling on my end of, well, people are not kind of sticking around for me, so it's fair game in a way for me to go wherever I want. And I can't say I've been bitter or anything like that, but it has kind of, opened that possibility for me that, my dad's in Africa, my mom's moving to Toronto, 4 hours or 5 hours away. They can't really get angry at me for wanting to move somewhere else because they're not here. And my mom, especially, who I'm very close to, when I told her that I was moving to Finland, she was very upset, actually. And I'm so close to my mom that I was scared that, is this going to put a wedge between us and our relationship? But the next day, she called me and she said, Simon, you're my son, you're my only child. I love you. I want you to be happy. And I know our discussion yesterday was not the best, and I'm sorry, but I just want you to be happy. And if you feel like going to Finland to pursue that your life is the right decision, then I will support you 100%. And to me, it showed a great deal of compassion and love, and pretty much, everything you want as a parent when you kind of think about raising your kids it's kind of, the art and loving way of letting go. So yes, there was resistance, but for just a very short time. And my dad was actually coming back to Canada when all of this was happening, but he had been gone for 5 years, so he couldn't really kind of get upset about me moving.
Had they not accepted, do you think you would have made the same decision?
I think, yeah, absolutely. I don't think I would have. I'm always somebody who's been very comfortable in the decisions that I've taken, in the passions I've pursued. So I would have probably done it anyway.
The story we're discussing, to me, it signals a pretty mature guy for 21, 22, making these decisions, having these difficult conversations with your mom, and then uprooting your life and going, and then starting from scratch when you arrive. Would you say in that moment you felt yourself maturing? Would you say you were already a pretty mature person?
I'm sure if we would ask people who knew me at that time, they would say I was not a very mature guy compared to, at 39, but especially my wife probably. But in that regard, yes, in the optics of wanting to settle down, wanting to have a family, wanting to have a career and stuff like that. That's something that I was kind of looking at from, I think, a mature lens.
I would say one thing that is clearly shows a sign of maturity is that you were willing to forego short-term gratification for long-term goals that you had set in your life, which was you knew you wanted to have a family, you knew you wanted to get married, and you knew you didn't really want to waste time and you pursued those goals. Whereas, you know, a 21-year-old may say, I have those goals, but like, why do I need them now? Like maybe I'll do them in 5 or 10 years. And then you wake up and you're 35 or maybe 40 and you still haven't begun to tackle that goal because you've been, you know, focused on short-term gratification. Was it easy for you to renounce some of the things that you needed to renounce in order to dive into this new life you were creating for yourself?
Looking back on it now, it's not as if I had a great deal of things that were attaching me to where I was at that time. So the decision was made easy in that regard. It was made easy because I didn't have so many strings attached. My dad was living in Africa. My mom was living in Toronto. So it was more or less only friendships that were holding me back. And I felt like, well, you know, friendships, if they are good friends or if they are good friendships, they'll survive the test of time and space or long distance. And, you know, the friendships that are not so good will probably fade out. But again, I don't feel like I had that much to lose by taking that leap of faith. So it's a different story. If I was risking a lot, then, you know, maybe I'd feel a different way, but I wasn't risking much by moving.
And I think you were pretty comfortable in your own skin in terms of being able to meet new people and make new friends and build a new network, social and professional.
Yeah, a bit. What was maybe more of a challenge was when I actually arrived in Finland. And for those of you who are familiar with Finland or not, it's a country that is, I would say, more introverted than extroverted. The people of Finland. So it was a surprise for me that to make friends or to make friendships here was a bit more challenging than I thought.
There's a lot of people today who are not convinced of marriage or not even convinced of monogamy. You made that decision pretty early on in your life. Were you certain that was going to satisfy Simon?
When I met my wife and everything, yes, absolutely. It wasn't really for me a question like it is for some other people, you know, where they want to have all these experiences before they commit to somebody. I would say that at the time, it wasn't something that was like preoccupying my mind or that I was thinking about so much. Just because it's something that I was like looking forward to, being in a relationship for a long time. And before I met my wife, my longest relationship was maybe 4 months. So I hadn't had really a very long-term relationship, you know, living with somebody and being with someone.
Can you think of any advice for any listeners who are maybe going through that decision now? Either they've met someone and they're thinking whether or not to take the plunge and they're asking themselves questions, or maybe listeners who are not even there yet, that feel like I'm nowhere near ready to get married, even though they know that a life goal is to get married and have kids. And I would say I would put myself in that bucket. I was someone who knew I wanted to have children, but I kind of thought that's going to come tomorrow. That my everyday actions didn't work towards that goal. And that's when at some point I woke up in my mid-30s and said, there's a disconnect here between my everyday actions and what I truly want long-term for my life. And that disconnect created a lot of anxiety and stress and loneliness for me. And for me, it was, you know, therapy really helped to kind of align those two together. And so any advice for people either in the first camp where they met someone and they're wondering, is this the one? Or in the second camp, which would be me, who know long-term they want this, but their actions are not aligned today with that goal?
You know, if somebody doesn't want to get married or doesn't feel ready to get married, they should in no way, shape, or form rush themselves to get married or to jump into something, because ultimately they won't be happy. I give the same advice to somebody who, you know, wants that commitment or wants that relationship. If that's what you feel you need in your life right now, then there's probably a good reason for it. I would say just the advice is really to listen to how you feel and to listen to what your thought flow is telling you. Everything happens in its time. Like for you, look what you have now, right? You're married, you have your first child. I don't think you would exchange that for anything else, right?
Right.
You've gone through what you needed to go through in order to lead up to what you have now. And then for sure, if we look at what you have now, it's precious. You never want to go away from that. So in a way, your journey, your path to where you are or where you were, was perfect for you. I would say the same thing for myself, because of course sometimes I can question, okay, well, did I commit myself to one person too early, or did I jump in too early? But really, would I change it? I wouldn't, because I have everything that I've wanted or that I want right now in my life. So.
And you talked about intuition earlier. Now you're talking about that voice. You're talking about it basically a feeling that comes from within that says, I'm ready, or this is the right. In today's society, we're just bombarded all the time with, like, we can't sit still. How do you make space for that voice? Like, how do you make space to hear that voice or follow that intuition?
Earlier in my life, when I took big decisions, when I took, leap of faiths, or when I changed the course of my life by making a decision or not, I can't say that I was actively listening to voice in my head or intuitive voice. I think I was acting more on a feeling, which I believe was intuition, looking back on it. And I think now what I've come to learn throughout the past probably 5 or so years is really to embrace this more kind of listening of your soul, basically listening of what your soul wants, and how to do that is more or less to slow down and to meditate. And I think that's a big part of my life now. But then again, before, when I was younger, it just kind of manifested itself through a feeling. I need to pursue this. It kind of makes my soul sing. It makes me excited.
Sounds like when you're younger, that voice, you may be more attuned to it. And maybe as you get older, it gets drowned out by life, stress, different reasons. Would you say that that is a true statement? And so as a result, that's why you need to work at it differently?
I do believe that we're all, quite sensitive beings. If I look at myself and I look back on my life, when I was younger, I was very sensitive, in touch with my emotions. And when I arrived at about, let's say 22, 23, 24, the life started chipping away at that sensitivity, and I kind of hardened myself very much. I became very negative. I became maybe even hard on my partner. I became very, it's just kind of the weight of the world and of your responsibilities starts to fall on your shoulders. And I think sometimes you can kind of forget a bit who you are. It can make you forget what your purpose is in life. It makes you maybe not the best version of yourself. And for me, it took some years. I was probably 34, where, I was kind of burning the candles at both ends. I was living incredible dreams. I was working in the NHL. I was very successful in my communications work, yet I wasn't really happy with who I was becoming. It took a few things, important things that happened in my life to reset the perspective, let's say, of how I want to live my life.
That's a good segue, because I do want to start to move towards some of these career shifts you made and the story of how you became a scout. But before I do that, you said that you needed to rejig things. There were some things you were not happy with. Can you just be a bit more specific about what it is that you felt needed to change?
I think it's a lot of things that people experience just in their life when they increase their level of responsibility, whether it's at home or at work. Stress starts to chip away at you. You get more impatient. You don't enjoy necessarily what you're doing on a professional level or even on a personal level. Life starts like taking all of your energy, and you are starting to place your energy in places where it's not really where you want to put that energy. And you're starting to feel like you're just one cog in the wheel, and you're replaceable, and B, people don't really care about your well-being. So if you don't take care of yourself, who will, really? If you're just chasing the professional career and you're chasing achievement after achievement or promotion after promotion, it's a race that you'll never stop unless you say, I don't want to play that game.
So it sounds like in terms of your time management, maybe it was too much energy in career and you just needed to rebalance some of that energy into other areas of your life that were more important.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a fair statement. Yeah.
So you became an NHL Scout, and for people who may not know, typically, so every NHL team, the NHL is a National Hockey League. Every NHL team has scouts throughout the world, and typically these scouts, they go out and they find the next generation of talent for the team. It's a crucial part of building a quality team, and most of these scouts tend to be ex-NHL players or hockey players that played at a very high level. Now, Simon, you've always been a good hockey player, but you didn't play at the NHL
nowhere
level.
Near a professional hockey
nowhere
player.
And so you decided to pursue this knowing full well that the deck was stacked against you. And so tell us a little bit about the journey into becoming an NHL Scout.
I was working at an elevator and escalator company in Finland at the time. I want to say I was at that company for maybe 5 or 6 years. And I was enjoying, the work I was doing, but was it really kind of fulfilling my passion? Was it really something that I was excited about when I woke up in the morning? No, it wasn't. And I was kind of thinking, what am I passionate about? What is something that I could kind of maybe redirect some of my energy and some of my effort to build something that could then be a career where I would be really fulfilled and really happy about. And I was like, well, I've always been very passionate about ice hockey, as many Canadians are, and I felt like, maybe I could become a scout. I could give it a try. So I remember we were going to bed one time with my wife one night, and I was just saying to her, Mari, that's my wife's name. I said, I'm going to work in the NHL. That's what I want to do. And she started laughing, and she said, well, Simon, you've never played professional hockey, or you don't really know anybody, you don't have really contacts. And I said, yeah, but I'll find a way. So I was a bit insulted that she laughed, but I thought, okay, it'll just kind of drive me a bit more. So I started doing whatever I could to get any kind of experience I could get, which eventually I started working for a company who did a software for all of the teams where they input their game reports. And I was videotaping players for them in Finland. So I did that for maybe like 1 season or even less. And I was just trying to kind of build up a resume that I could at least have some experience when I presented myself to some teams. And, eventually it worked. So I was able to start doing some freelance video work for the San Jose Sharks. That was the year of the lockout. So then that was about 10 years ago, a bit more than 10 years ago. And that eventually led to a European video scout position with the Columbus Blue Jackets, which I did for then 4 years. And then they gave me the territory of Finland as to be the scout. And this was all kind of part-time. I was also working in communications and PR, and I had a good career there. So I was like for 8.5 years, I was working what I called two full-time jobs, even though one was full-time, one was part-time. But of course, the part-time job I was fully dedicated to. It was a kind of a passion but it also demanded a lot of travel inside Finland. So I would work, 8-hour day, and then I would drive 3 hours to go to Pori in Finland, and come back after the game. It was probably midnight or 1 a.m. So they were long days. And when I talked about, burning the candles at both ends, that was definitely part of it. But yeah, it was a great experience. I would, I've never regretted going and chasing that dream, but it was also part of my personality. And I think you said it in the intro of when I put my mind to something, I dive into it 100%. And I was like that even more when I was younger. I think as I've grown older, I'm a bit less like that. And to my detriment, I think.
Well, on the one hand, you talked earlier about needing to rebalance your life. On the other hand, you're proud of the fact that you have this in you to pursue and kind of vision a goal and then work towards it. I also know, like, you bought a plane ticket and flew to the NHL draft on your dime.
Yeah,
you made some bold moves that you didn't know what the outcome was. You weren't thinking so much about the short-term outcome. You were doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're willing to take risks. And now you said, well, I'm a bit older, and maybe to my detriment, I'm not so much like this because I need to rebalance my life. But in a way, you can't have it both ways, right? Or can you? Can you rebalance your life and still pursue these goals?
If you look at all the kind of very successful CEOs or founders, entrepreneurs, and stuff like that, very few of them will talk about their great work-life balance. Even athletes, professional athletes, and so on, you have to have a bit of an obsessive mind to be able to reach greatness, which in a way is a good thing and a bad thing. Is it sustainable in the long run? No. That's what I think. And if you look at a lot of the great innovators, great founders, great CEOs, great athletes, a lot of them, typically end up having issues, whether it's personal issues, whether it's addiction issues, whether it's health issues, whether it's scandals, stuff like that. There's usually something that comes out of it, because to have that balance is very important. And that's what I've learned, basically, in the past maybe 10 years.
When you were burning the candle at both ends, how old were your children?
My son was born the day after the day before I accepted my first position as a scout. So he was very young. So I would say they were between the ages of 1 and 7, probably.
Do you have any guilt about that time away?
Not really. Because I'm also so present now in their lives that whatever time that I might have missed then, now I've more than enough compensated for. And I'm also somebody who's never lived with regrets. I think that I've always been very comfortable in the decisions I've made and the consequences that have kind of stemmed from those decisions. I've always kind of owned up to them. I know some people, even in my kind of immediate family, who have always kind of regretted things in their lives and have always talked about missed opportunities. And if this would have happened, it would have been, so much better and stuff like that. I've never really lived my life like that. So no, I don't have any regrets, because I lived incredible experiences as well at the same time.
I mean, the reason I ask is, I see you as a present father and someone who's been, who has a good relationship with his kids, and your kids are exceptionally well behaved, I would say, whenever they've been around me. And the reason I'm asking is I'm actually going through something now where I have an opportunity to join some sort of startup boot camp that would take me away from my son and my wife for at least 10 weeks. And maybe I can come back on the weekends, a few weekends throughout those 10 weeks. But it's 10 weeks when I have a 17-month-old, it just seems like a long time. And so I was wondering what emotions you may have felt when you were putting in 12 or 16-hour workdays in those formative years.
Yeah, but it's a bit different. I was seeing them every day. I've always seen them every day, my kids, more or less. Or, maybe a 1 week or 10-day business trip here or there. But I was still seeing them fairly frequently, on a daily basis. So it's a bit different. I would also feel reservations for, to leave them for 10, you said 10 weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not an easy decision for sure.
So in your case, your career has been PR communications, which has paid the bills, and you've had success, and people have been willing to pay you to do it. So you obviously have been doing something right. But your passion's becoming an NHL scout. That's kind of been, call it your side hustle, even though it was as much of a commitment as a full-time job. And then you have other side hustles as well that we can certainly get into. Did you ever attempt to combine those two? Or in your mind, were you always comfortable with it being, okay, I have something that's going to pay the bills. It's not going to be the center of my life. I'm going to then carve out time and space and energy to do these things that I really love doing.
The objective was always to eventually move away from the PR and communications work to focus full-time on hockey. That was kind of the dream, and that was the objective. And for X amount of reasons, that didn't happen. And when I started feeling like it's not going to happen, that's when I started really feeling a lack of motivation to continue in with that kind of goal. There were a lot of opportunities that came, or a couple opportunities that came after that, after I kind of decided to quit, because I actually quit the Blue Jackets. I resigned, which is not so common. Usually you get fired. But
why'd you walk away?
The objective, just exactly what I think I explained. The objective for me was always to work full time in hockey, and it didn't happen. Personally, I think it was more because they knew I had this very good career full time in PR communications, working for good Finnish companies, and the GM was Finnish, so he knew the companies I was working for. He was a very smart guy too. And he didn't, I believe, a combination of, well, he has this successful career and he's doing a great job in the position that he's in. So why change it? Why mess with something that's working for us? And we're paying him probably peanuts compared to others. So, yeah. And eventually I just kind of thought, well, I wasn't so happy with the fact that I had been working 8 years part-time and there wasn't anything full-time, and I resigned. And sometimes I don't regret it, but sometimes I feel, was it the right decision or not? I think whenever you have the opportunity to stand up for what you believe in, for what you think is the right move, it's probably the right thing to do. So,
was there an inner voice too at that time that was helping to guide you?
Yeah, I would say it's like that inner voice, that feeling of I'm not happy with what I'm doing. I'm not getting that enjoyment. I'm not getting that fulfillment. That passion's not there anymore. And it should be, because it's something that I've enjoyed doing for 8 years and that I wanted so bad. So if I'm really not happy doing it, there's a serious problem. It's about listening to your emotions, and it's about also listening to how you feel. Not necessarily listening to what you're thinking, but listening to how your body is making you feel.
I find it's not always easy to discern between the two. How do you do that?
Well, I think the mind is, it's a bit paranoid, right? The mind is kind of always thinking about, will I survive? Will I be able to make it out alive? But the body, there's a certain feeling, a physical feeling. It's not that voice in your head that's always resonating and always questioning and always going, a bit crazy. And actually it was a book of one of your fellow podcast guests who recommended this book, The Untethered Soul. Jean-Philippe made that recommendation on LinkedIn one day, and I was in an airport, and I thought, hey, I'm going to try to find this book. And there was one copy left, and I read it, and it changed my life. It was such a profound experience, actually, because it was exactly about that. It was exactly about the voice in your head is not you. You are not that voice. You're so much more than that. And the voice in your head is just kind of your insecurities, or your mind and your brain trying to navigate the world, but it doesn't mean that your thoughts are you. And that for me I was reading it in the plane and I started crying because it was so profound and it was such a kind of aha moment. And I don't remember really the exact date or year I read that book, but it was pretty much around the time of all of this kind of transformation that was happening, and that I made kind of those decisions of moving on from the hockey work and stuff like that.
I also read that book, and I also think it can have a profound impact. And so I'll post a link to the description to The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer in the description of the podcast for those who are curious to get their hands on a copy.
It's a great book, sold millions of copies. And
when you left NHL Scout, maybe that's where the big rebalance started. Since then, you've been very focused on your health, both physical and mental, and also focused in other areas, your spirituality. Would love to hear more about that and how that's had an impact on you.
It is absolutely correct when you say that resigning from the Blue Jackets was actually like the first domino in a rebalancing my life. And there were other dominoes. A year and a half later, resigned from a job that I was working in, which was it was a very high paying job. It was a startup that I really enjoyed working for, but I couldn't get behind the leadership or the management. I had worked for big successful companies, stock listed companies in Finland with amazing leaders who I've learned so much from. So then to go to a bit of a more smaller company where I felt like the leadership was lacking was a shock. So that was another domino then that fell. Around the same time, my brother, or half brother, committed suicide, which of course was a huge shock to the system and to my life, and it shakes you to your core. So all of those things combined, you start questioning where are your priorities, where do you want to put your efforts in life. And about 2 years ago, this was right about the time that I resigned from this startup. I started, putting a much bigger emphasis on my physical well-being and my health. I started going to the gym almost 4 to 5 times a week, getting into better shape because I felt like I was getting the dad bod and I was kind of letting myself go. And I lacked the energy, and I always felt like going to the gym was something that gave me energy. So it has been very much a journey in the past 2.5 or 3 years of rediscovering what I want to do. Luckily, having worked all those years, 2 jobs, I had saved some money. I was financially secure for a while, that I could give myself that time to really introspectively look at my life and what I wanted to keep in my life and what I didn't want to have in my life anymore. Has it been easy and straightforward? No, it's been sometimes very difficult, very frustrating, but I do have that feeling that it's ultimately it's for the better. And right now what I'm doing is I've basically for the past 10 months, I've founded my own consultancy for PR and communications, and it's been a very good learning experience, and now it's finally starting to kind of a bit of traction, which is nice. Is it what I want to do for the rest of my life? Probably not. Do I know right now what I want to do with my life? Not really, to be honest. I think I joked to you beforehand that, for me it's more like the wanting to be Peter Pan and not after Peter Pan. And you talked about spirituality. It has become an important part of my life, meditation. I think it all comes into the same topic of our purpose here on life. Why are we here? And that's something that about 5 years ago, I was really starting to question. I was working 2 jobs, like we talked earlier. I was not so happy with what I was becoming as a father, as a husband, as a friend even to some people. as a colleague. And I started questioning, why am I here? What's my purpose? Why are we here? And for me, that's really what spirituality is looking at the greater of ourselves and thinking about why are we here, basically.
When I thought about a title for this episode, I was thinking, to me, you're like the anti-Peter Pan. Peter Pan is this syndrome of not wanting to grow up. And I associate short-term thinking, hedonistic lifestyle, and a disconnect between what you really want to get out of life and what you're actually doing in your day-to-day, and not stepping up and taking responsibility in the world. And that's what I think of when I think of Peter Pan. And to me, you were the anti-Peter Pan because you did the opposite of that. You made big decisions at a young age. You took responsibility. You started a family. You started a career, and everything that we've talked about. And now today, we've had chats recently where your kids are more and more independent, and you probably have more time on your hands than you ever have. And so you have more time to ask yourself those questions. And so maybe that's where you're saying this Peter Pan situation is coming in. So you say, I don't really know what I want to do. Where are you looking for answers? Because, I had JP on the podcast. I also had my friend Ashwin on the podcast. And the common theme was the answer to that question is not out there. It's in here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so for you, how are you tackling that question as someone who's in life?
I do agree 100%. It is in here and it's not out there for sure. But I can honestly say that right now, I just don't know inside, right? And I guess it's about just taking that time to allow life to happen. I'll find something that I'm kind of very passionate about and I'll be like, yes, that's what I want to do. And it's trusting in life that day will come, because I do feel like it will. I'm somebody who's very determined, who's very dedicated, and I can have a quite, intense nature to myself, as you know. Already maybe now at this point in my life, I feel like, okay, there's got to be something now. But I will jump into something when I get that feeling, that intuitive feeling of yes, I can get behind that,
And I think that in the meantime, when you don't know which direction you want to go, it's like you're in a room that's completely dark and you don't know if you go in one direction, you don't know what's waiting for you at the end. But all you can do is take that next step, right? Like you need to have faith in the step. And so with you, for example, like let's talk about your physical health. You're very, very passionate about the gym right now. And what did you do? You went out and became a certified trainer. That's a step. Like, do you know if that's what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life? You don't know the answer to that. But at least you took a step, right?
Yeah.
And you're taking steps and kind of feeling it out, because the opposite would be to just stagnate, just stay in one place. And I think that's what a lot of people do, because they're paralyzed with some fear, some anxiety, and just ambiguity. They're waiting for more certainty, and unfortunately in life, that certainty never comes. You got to have faith in the timing of your life.
Yeah, and I think life rewards movement as well. If you're stagnant, usually life passes you by. So if you take these steps, if you take these, whatever those steps might be, it's better than just staying stagnant. And if I go back to actually when I decided to move to Finland, this is very interesting. It goes back to this kind of having faith in life or the universe or whatever you want to call it. Having faith that things will work out. They might not work out exactly like you want them to, but they'll work out somehow and you'll learn from it. Because, when I moved to Finland, I said that earlier that I was, it was at the time when I was ending my studies and everything like that. I actually had one semester left, and I had gone to Finland to spend Christmas with my future fiance. And I had spent a month there, came back, and I was supposed to finish my last semester. And I think I lasted a week back in Canada and at the university, I didn't want to be there. I didn't want I knew that my heart and my life was going to be in Finland. And when I was in Finland during that period of time, I had actually had an interview with the company I eventually worked for, Nokia, and I hadn't heard back from them if I had gotten the job or not. And the day that I took the decision to finish my university studies and to finish all of my courses by correspondence so that I could finish them while I was in Finland, the day I decided to do that, I got home and I called my wife, then my fiance or my girlfriend, and I said to her, I'm coming home earlier, or I'm coming to Finland earlier, and I opened my email, and I had an email from the hiring manager saying that you've been selected out of 200 people to get the job. And it was just kind of amazing, coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences, but it was such a weird thing that it was happening on the same day that I had really decided that I'm leaving. So I don't know if it's from that or from later on in life or even before in life, but I've always had a innate knowing that, things kind of if you work hard and if you do the right things, you're taken care of somehow. The universe looks out for you in a way. And right now in my life, although things are maybe not going exactly like I would like them to go or exactly like I would plan them, if I could plan my life in a certain way, it's not going necessarily that way, but I do still have that trust that, things will unblock at some point. And I think you've probably had the same thing in your life sometimes where things are overwhelming, things are not going your way, but eventually that changes. It might take longer, it might take more months or more years than you think, but eventually there's an blockage at some point. Have you had those kinds of moments where...
Yeah, it makes me think of the word manifest. Sometimes inexplicable things happen, the timing of things, you just say, this can't be a coincidence. And sometimes just the decisions working up to that, then the outcome manifests itself. The other thing that comes to mind with what you said is this mantra that I came across last summer when I was on a retreat in Spain, and it was trust, let go, be open. Very powerful mantra that I tend to repeat to myself when I'm in unknown or situations that cause stress or anxiety or just fear and unknown. But I think, Simon, we're coming up on the end of the episode, and I think we're closing at a good place. One question that I would like to ask to close with is that I gave my definition of growing up in this episode. It really is the genesis for the concept of this podcast, but I realized that growing up means different things to different people. I'd love to hear what it means for you to grow up.
I think the first thing that pops into my head when you say that is just, for me, growing up was realizing my parents weren't perfect, and then to have to live that now with my kids also. That, right now, well, maybe not my 13-year-old, she definitely doesn't think I'm perfect, but my 11-year-old still thinks I'm perfect, that I'm the best and stuff like that. I always try to make them understand that I'm not. And I'm just a person and I'm a human, and humans are therefore not perfect. And for me, it goes beyond fatherhood or parenthood, because at the end of the day, we're all not perfect. And we all need to have that compassion with each other also. Kind of, you're meeting somebody where they are in their life at that particular time in their life, and you never know what they're going through. You never know what they've gone through. And that, to me, demands a lot of growing up from everybody, to see that in other people and to realize that when you interact with people is I think very important. It's easy to say it, but in practice it's very difficult even for me to put into application when I have my interactions with family members or friends or people in the streets. So
a message of compassion, and so that's a great place to close. Thanks for sharing that, Simon. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I would love to have you on again sometime in the future.
Absolutely.
It's
Thank you.
really good. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, again,
Cool.
Thanks, Simo. It was great.
Thank you. All right. Take care.
Bye. Hey, listeners, thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you found the episode entertaining and insightful. It was the first episode in the Anti-Peter Pan series. My thinking with this series is to drop an episode from time to time where I interview someone who dove into life responsibility and commitment at a young age. And I was really thinking about our listeners who associate with the Peter Pan syndrome. By the way, if you enjoyed the episode, I'd love to hear from you. I love this fan mail feature, which is a link that is embedded in the description wherever you listen to your podcasts, and those messages go directly to me. So I would love to hear from you, any feedback, any recommendations or ideas. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time.